Should I go back and?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, next up, is a review of the minutes from June 18th. I looked at them briefly, they're all good.
I made a couple of suggested, minor revisions for clarity.
I'm pulling them up. Thank you. We changed green to yellow. Jacob.
Oh, I did, yes.
Yeah.
I actually, even though I
It
was
looks like I
there.
did it in blue.
Uh-huh. Well, green and yellow.
Yeah.
Blue is the one that's missing, right? Even though I wasn't there, I read the minutes carefully. Thank you, whoever took them, because they were very thorough. I did, right above where you are, Emily, I added the word circ to alternatives, just so it kind of flags it a little better. And, yeah. Just
Good idea. For the people of the future.
Yes, like alternatives, what does that mean? Anything else, Chapin, that you wanted to flag?
And the stuff, it'll show like that, is in the area where we were talking about, the yellow team stuff, which was, visual, what is it, working landscape and stuff. So I just put some clarifying things in there mostly. I did put something too about transportation. We're not, are you scrolling and we're not seeing it? Or, you know,
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm scrolling in tonight's minutes, not tomorrow's. Last minute. So the transportation.
So they're working landscapes.
Mhm.
So especially at the end there, where just the observations that were listed in that bullet, they really gave me pause on how to approach the town's desire to to preserve working landscapes when there's a problem with not mowing. If we don't want to mow wetlands, which many of them are, even though they're hay or pastured, and if we want to deal with invasives that come into not mown places, and the fact that it really was a short period in history that they were open. And so all of that gave me pause about how we approach this. And so we love the idea of working landscapes, but we no longer have dairy farms. And so, you know, to me, that the important part of all that was that I have pause. I don't have an answer, but
I have a related question, but I don't know if it should come up during the minutes or not. It's about working landscapes. In the meeting, so I watched the meeting, and I noticed in the working landscapes piece, that golf courses were mentioned and some other recreational kinds of facilities. And I was just kind of like, huh, I hadn't really thought of like recreational spaces as a working landscape. And so I don't know if that may also be kind of, maybe we need a better definition to be a little clearer. And I think it's been used, at least what I've seen in the academic world. I have a colleague who did a whole project on working landscapes. She's our rural geographer. And it was definitely very rooted in agricultural use. And, you know, maybe a bit of forestry, obviously sugar bushes, that kind of thing, but yeah, but golf courses, I was like, that's such an unnatural landscape, and yet, and then I'm like, well, maybe I'm just like not really into golf and that's,
Well,
you know, on me. I don't know.
We were really trying to feel our way through there because we thought, what are other ways that the land can be worked? That
Yeah.
that brings people together or it meets a need of the community. And we talked, you know, there used to be a ski tow down
Yeah,
at the
North Williston Road.
farm at the end of North Williston Road.
Mhm,
That probably is a okay
mhm.
thing, and keeping that area open for skiing and sledding probably is okay. And so what other kinds of activities
Mm,
could keep land open productively?
mm.
And so in this case, it's not the agricultural working, but it's the openness of the space
Mhm.
without having it be full of invasives, or be mowing wetlands. We also, hope we emphasized in there, I think Andrew can say if we did, I've emphasized the idea of smaller agriculture, people with goats, chickens,
Mhm.
and so forth, cumulatively are the agriculture of today, or some of the agriculture today, and we know we want to do more with locally grown food.
Mhm.
And so that's another, but essentially we have to think, what's the replacement for dairy? Because we still have some, we have one milking farmer still, I think. Are they still milking some at Johnson Farm? They're mostly doing pigs
And
and
then also
chickens and stuff.
on Theme Lane. Right?
They're done.
Yeah, they
They're
sold the
phasing out.
herd. So we're down to a small, at one, at most,
But no.
dairy, and so. And it hasn't been replaced wholesale by sheep or something else that would use gracelands. Or horses that would, you know, for haying and so forth, and so. We're on this declining path of that use.
Mhm.
And when you abandon the pasture, the hayfield, you have other problems with invasives that we then as a town have to manage. So we're trying to be creative. If people
Yeah.
like open spaces, what other uses are there that will provide open space? And so it's no longer working landscape in the agricultural sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
But to me, it's more a statement of a problem there than of a solution.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm just kind of wondering if maybe working landscape isn't the phrase that we need for, for this chapter even. You know, maybe it's about open space, or maybe it's about,
Open space and viewscapes.
or natural spaces, or, I mean, but some of them really are not natural. Even the agricultural sites aren't actually natural.
I think,
More like a managed landscape.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of like everything that doesn't have houses or
Trees.
commercial or industrial buildings on it.
I suppose, yeah.
Trees, if you, depending on how you look at forestry,
Yeah.
you know, I think. Working landscape is useful in expressing the goal that. Some of the land in town is valued for and used for. Its ability to produce something.
Mhm.
So it's not all kind of under glass, it's not all being left completely alone. And acknowledging that a lot of the landscape that most people in Williston are used to. Comes from people working on the land. There are, so I understand the struggle with like, well, golf courses are also places that don't have lots of houses and buildings on them. And places like the Ski Tow or the Catamount Outdoor Family Center are. You know, you don't really need open fields at Catamount
Mhm.
to have Nordic skiing. If you didn't mow them, in fact, you know, you wouldn't. So some of this is about. What is the goal in terms of keeping an aesthetic view of something that people are used to?
Mhm.
And also, yeah, I think recognizing that the way it looks now, or that this chapter might propose to conserve. Is a way it's only been for really a short while.
Mhm.
Yeah, it stuck there, like 1800 to 1950 was the kind of agriculture we're used to seeing, that we sort of have a romantic idea of that's the agriculture of Vermont. The sheep pretty much gone out of memory 100 years ago. Sheep would have been the working landscape, but the dairy is most people's impression of a working landscape. Things related to dairy, raising corn for feed, hay, pasture, and cattle.
You know, the other thing you might think about is that having a working landscape in town means that you have forestry and agriculture and recreational uses happening in town. And that means you're sometimes behind a tractor driving down the road or riding your bike down the road, or you see people going to and from Catamount with bikes and skis, you know, on their cars. Barns are in use, at least some of them, and not empty and falling apart. So there's also the sort of like, because you have a working landscape, you have these other things happening in town that people value and people like, and I know you're in
Or do
your,
you want it bigger?
I just wanna say, okay, so we can see.
oh,
Oh my goodness.
sorry. So I don't know, I mean, that could split out into a whole other, you know,
Yeah.
whether you're talking about land use or the types of industry that are in town or all of those other things.
Yeah,
But I think if there's such a thing as character, scary word sometimes. That's maybe another way of wrapping your arms around it, and maybe you do that somewhere else, and you don't have to get that all into what you're saying about the landscape, but you are saying. Some of the landscape of this town, you want it to support certain things continuing to happen in town. Like, it would be nice to see goats and horses and cows out on some of that landscape, or people cutting hay. I mean, you know, so much of the experience of spring and summer in Vermont to me is like noticing, oh, they've made their first cut of hay. Or, you know, they're out there working like crazy. It must be a couple dry days coming, you know, there's a connection to that, and it's more like cultural and social than necessarily about environmental quality. So anyway, you guys are doing minutes right now.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really great question, Chip, and I'm glad you guys grappled with this.
I just wanted, because Shayla isn't here and she's the other yellow team person, I wondered if Andrew wanted to comment on this conversation.
No, I think you covered it. I think I would, what Matt just said, I totally agree with. So,
And I'm
Of
sure
course
like
it does.
we're iterating over all these chapters, like it will come back up again in a second
Yeah.
round.
Yeah.
So if we wanna really dig
Yeah.
into it, once we get into it there, I think.
Yeah.
We know that we wanna hone in on it once we get there again.
So thank you all for indulging me. I didn't mean to derail us from the minutes, but.
No, it's a really important point.
But I do think it would be good for all of us to be thinking about
Yeah.
that and thinking like, what is it that we value? Is it just nostalgia, or is there something more substantial?
Does anyone wanna move to approve them?
I'll move to approve the minutes as amended. Happy to second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No.
Abstentions?
One abstention.
Although you watched the recording.
I
so-
did,
Well,
yeah,
I think
that's true.
I think
Yeah,
it's-
okay, I voted for it in favor.
So
That's
it's
true.
unanimous.
Good point. Great.
Jill voted too.
And moving on to the annual report for FY 24.
So we can ghost in an annual report for you. They need to be one page, so it's a pretty easy task. But
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, looking for maybe a couple commission members who just want to be in touch with us on that. And
What's the timeline on that?
I think Sarah will start bugging us about the beginning of December to give it to her for the town report. And the thing is, it's about the fiscal year that just ended.
Yeah.
Okay,
So what happens is if we don't do it now,
Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah,
will be
forget.
totally
Yeah.
not remembering what we
We're like,
did.
was that in August or June?
yeah, so July 1st, 2023 to June 30th of this year.
I think for the readers, it's okay to say, you know, like 1 year we said the energy plan was on the select board, and then to say and adopted in October.
Yeah, you can.
I think
Yeah.
Sarah kind of tweaked some of that.
Yeah,
she
I think
tweaked
she really wants it to be the fiscal year, and unfortunately, like, if there's a new member, it's like, sorry, you'll be in the next one. So I think like, I think maybe Hannah might be new in this one. Yeah.
Not mentioned yet.
Yeah.
no, shoot have been.
I think Steve and I
FY
joined,
24.
the three of us joined when y'all were just approving
previous years.
Yeah.
And it's like, we don't know what anything that happened.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd like to nominate Steve to help with this. Because it would be really nice to tell it as a story. And we tend to do we approve this, we did, you know,
Yeah.
it's not, it would be really nice to have a story, like a better reading.
Sure. At some point, obviously, maybe you and I can sit down and just kind of help me understand as a person reading this thing, I've gotten to the end of it, what has changed? What do I now know that will help me?
And of course, Jill and Shayla should be your primary resources from the committee, but I'm happy to, I've written these for the Green Mountain Transit as well as for us in the past.
Okay, cool.
Happy to help.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you.
I took a brief tour through what all has happened in the last fiscal year. It's fairly impressive. I mean, you're talking about all of the housing supported bylaw amendments. All the way through, another round with official map and, all of that.
Staff does give us the list of.
Yeah, we'll tell you,
Yeah.
we'll tell you.
Have to go
the
from memory.
Since I don't have one, that would.
Well, there you go. You're in good company then.
So there's quite a lot of work and things that resulted in, the sort of the final state of, something like a bylaw adoption or document being done. Those Glazer approved.
I think that was also
That
this
was-
fiscal year.
No, well, we took the vote in June
And
of
the
last
select-
year.
And the
Yeah,
select board
so-
would have.
Yeah, so I think we said like, and the planning commission transmitted to the select board, so yeah, now we can say it's
Yeah.
like.
Well, this is nice timing too, because as we move into the plan, for the next big plan, this would be a nice kind of not a preview, but there's been a lot going on here as we move into this, so. maybe a
Yeah,
transition point.
It's gonna cover all of the fall Williston 2050 outreach.
Mhm.
We can drop a
Yep.
photo of that in there.
So yeah, you all did a lot of work this last
You're
fiscal.
looking at bullet points now, Steve.
Yeah, you're not gonna have-
Sorry about that story thing.
Very little bullet.
Very small. Very terse.
I think Steve can do it.
I think there's a nice combination of fulfilling things that were stated as desirable to get done in the current town plan and preparing for the next one.
Yeah, I like
Sort of
that.
theme.
I like that. Yeah. kind of
Except for the
bridge.
village plan that sort of got.
Yeah, we're still working on that.
Spent a year of being pushed aside.
Well, we upped the density because we had to.
Yeah.
We just didn't know, we didn't change it to
The state up there.
The permit thresholds, we did get that through with the last round, so that's made life a little easier.
You failed on chickens.
Oh,
Oh,
Trojan chicken. You put it in any bylaw amendment and it's the thing that will.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the red herring chicken, I don't know.
No chicken puns.
All right, and with that,
Thank you,
the
Ellie.
next item
Well
on the
done.
agenda. The letter,
So, folks may recall, from a few months ago, we had preliminary, applications, for two large solar facilities in Williston, both of them associated with Global Foundries and both of them in the sort of the Redmond Road area. This one is the one that's closer to the Winooski River. Chip Alley is the access road down into, the former IBM campus. And, the applicants sent us a letter, which I didn't link to, but I can send around, of comment from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, which was supportive of the project across all dimensions. What I asked Melinda to do was take a look at it, both in the context of what CCRPC had to say about it, as well as Williston's energy plan. So this letter is new to everybody. My apologies, I just got it up for folks to look at today. But what happens starting about, 2/3 of the way down there is looking at this against the town's siting policies in its energy plan. So we're not in a map scenic view shed. We are within significant wildlife habitat area, however, the applicant has done a habitat disturbance assessment, which is the same thing we would make them do if they were subject to our zoning. Then we go to watershed protection. There are class 2 wetlands on the site, but they will be maintaining a 50-foot buffer to those. And they are near transmission lines, because they're near where Global Foundries connects to the GMP grid. It's not a wind system. It's not in a historic district. And there is information the applicant's given us about utility lines being underground as part of their talking about aesthetics, which is what our siting policies say we want to see. They do not plan to incorporate energy storage into this project. They do plan to use a heck of a lot of this energy on site though. So if folks know some of the background of this is that Global Foundries has asked to be their own utility. And one of the conditions of being allowed to do that by the Public Utility Commission is to up their renewable power mix. Just like if they were buying from a utility in Vermont that's under that same requirement. And so this on-site generation is part of them doing that. So this is one of 2 facilities. Like I said, this is the one that's further away from Mountain View Road, closer to the Winooski River. We'll likely get a request from them, the applicants, to pass on a similar letter for the other facility sometime soon. And I asked them, I said, they said, can we get a letter? And I said, from me, the select board, the planning commission, the town manager, who do you want the letter from? They said, oh, any of you is fine. And I said, well, how about I show it to the planning commission since it's related to the energy plan that originated with the energy committee in here. And they said, okay, so that's the draft letter.
So, I'm in favor of both locations. I was upset that they called it the least environmental impact, because the least environmental impact would have been to do it over the parking lots, not in the field. And they didn't seem to get that point. But the number of trees they have to cut is relatively small. And they said they're gonna use fencing, but put it upside down so the larger holes are on the bottom to not restrict smaller animals' passage. But that they were gonna fence it because it's not gonna have, you know, I think if you put your stuff in conduit or between all the, you know, you can protect it enough that then you don't have to put a fence around. Some people want a fence anyway, but then the fence interrupts wildlife. But they are planning to brush hog the area. So to me, they're like, should we put something in here that we encourage them to allow maximum passage of wildlife and to, you know, we talked to them about, they said they were interested in getting sheep or something to graze it. Is this a place to say anything about that, or are we just gonna say we agree with the plan?
I think it's fine to say that and just,
We're not requiring anything, all we can say is we encourage.
yeah, and if you can tie it to anything in the energy plan, and we don't have to find that now, I would just ask Melinda if it's possible, like, for example, if it's using livestock to graze rather than brush hogging, you're not, you know, burning carbon, great, the fencing or.
And it's.
Working landscape.
Yeah.
Just thinking that. Yeah.
So, you know, up to the group, but if you want to give us that advice, we can work something like that in and then.
I think
let her
the
along.
energy plan does encourage keeping livestock with everything from pollinator flowers to whatever, but to limit
Okay.
machinery, I think. Anyway, my suggestion, just say that we encourage adding that to the project over time.
I'm not sure how much like we actually have sway over here, but I'm curious, they're not planning to connect to the grid. And I would be curious, like, if in the ebbs and flows, they're producing in a surplus? And like, when does it make sense? Like, is there ever a time where it makes sense to ask somewhere on the realm of ask to require that they do connect to the grid if they're producing in surplus?
That's a good idea also because, you know, companies don't last forever
Mhm.
and that's gonna be a huge infrastructure piece and like maybe some kind of identification of what their kind of future plans are and contingencies if, you know, if Global Foundries disappears, just like its predecessor, you know, what happens to that infrastructure
Mhm.
if another entity comes along that doesn't need that much power, or, you know, or it's just all chopped up into smaller industries or something like that, and what, you know, it seems like we would almost want some kind of request that in that case, it be tied to the grid at their expense or something like that.
I would think that would be contemplated in becoming a utility, cause like a utility
Mm,
can't just dissolve
right.
itself, it has to go through the state.
Yeah, we could get something in the letter, but I'll also ask Melinda if we can ask the applicants to maybe point us to some sections in the filing that might address some of that stuff.
Mhm.
Cause I've gotta believe there's something that says, what if we make too much electricity and it's more than we can use?
Right.
They can't just, you know, burn it off, it has to go somewhere, so.
Well,
You know.
if you can turn them off just by not providing a field to.
Right.
So that
Mhm.
they can regulate how much they produce, but it'd be a shame to be wasting it.
But I think they're using, you know.
Yeah, if I recall, they said that building that's on the Williston side is not any of their production, that's all leased out to other people.
That's correct.
So when they're not connecting to the grid, is it going to that building or is it going only over across the river? I don't know.
I'm gonna guess that it's only going across the river, and the reason is just that everything Global has kind of done throughout their ownership has been toward, wanting to kind of separate the Williston side.
Yeah.
I don't think they see the Williston side as being useful for their operations really, really ever. And there are some things about it that are very interconnected with Essex. You know, the buildings on the Williston side actually do use the private wastewater treatment plant, for example, that's one of the two that's, on the former IBM campus, so. You know, somebody asked us once, and I think it was pretty informally, oh, well, could you connect those buildings to your system instead? And we said, well, that's a really long way around, and also we're looking to.
Yes.
You know, we're not looking to connect things that already have wastewater treatment to our existing system. Given its capacity, but it seems like I wouldn't be surprised if the power wasn't connected to the Williston side buildings at all. But we can ask.
Yeah, I guess those are my two things, like, what's the contingency if they're producing too much? Is it just gonna get wasted or can it get plugged into the grid? And also what happens when it hits its end of life? Like, how are they gonna responsibly dismantle it? So whenever the property dies, we're not just left with this massive infrastructure that's just sitting there. Like, obviously, it's not in this, it's in an industrial area of town, but like,
Yeah,
and you know, maybe that's fine and market pressures will force it to clear out or become something else, but those are two things I'm thinking about when we improve such a large installation. Or like, at least say we can support it.
The other thing in the energy plan is we have a goal of making a certain amount of renewable energy and we aren't coming close. So their facility will help us reach that goal. Really strange, they're not adding storage, so since they are a utility.
They might just be confident they're gonna use so much of it, but I mean, imagine like on a weekend, the sun still shines, but. Imagine their usage is less, but maybe they just use so much of it that they just know that they're not, you know, they don't need it.
Yeah, the other sort of practical boring fact is that those kinds of facilities never over time demand less power, you know. I mean, really, I mean, they, you know, they constantly, and especially if they grow and so on, which they may do. I can't imagine them routing some of the available power to the buildings on our side if they're not their world, just because of the contingency of having available power should they need it.
Yeah, that is an interesting question that comes to mind after Chapin's comment too, of like, whose proportion of renewable energy does this count toward? Williston or Essex?
No, it's ours.
What's
Well,
that?
we get half of the dam
Yeah,
We do,
and it has to be ours
we could ask Melanie Needle at the RPC. that
because it's
question.
located on our town land.
mhm.
I can't imagine that accounting for someone else. Of course, they'll sell the Rex to Connecticut.
Yeah. Love it.
Okay,
Yeah,
Ready to move on to town plan draft chapters?
yeah.
Any of these topics we want to tackle first?
Well, I can go first, cause it'll be brief, because not much has happened since the last time, working on the utilities chapter. Megan wanted to give you a moment if you had any thoughts from watching the recording.
yeah, I read this and I read all the links, a lot of the links from different utility organizations, like GMP. I read actually kind of a lot of the GMP thing, not all 270 pages of it, but kind of, and it looked good. I mean, this is a really, it's obviously still bare bones, and I appreciate your work on this, Emily, but there was one little thing that occurred to me, and it's to do with I don't know if it would go in this chapter, although it should probably be addressed. I've kind of been thinking about it for quite a while. It's about the sewer capacity, but more in the sense of how that influences development outside of the sewer service district. So, and a lot of my concern is actually to do with public perception, because I would love this plan to have a very clear explanation. I think we have clear explanations of, focusing on development in the sewer service area. That's now been reinforced by is it the Home Act? And so I think that piece is understandable, just, is kind of legible to the community. And that's very important. One thing that Ken actually said a long time ago was that a lot of the rest of Williston doesn't perk for septic. And I don't think that is well understood broadly. And I think it's actually a really compelling reason that kind of adds to our other reasons of why focusing growth in the growth center is important. I think there is a tendency to say, oh, but we have all this land out here, or, oh, I own, 15 acres out here. Just want to, put a modest little house up here, maybe not realizing that when you can't put a traditional septic system in, you need the engineered mound system, which is very expensive. And so, especially in the kind of thinking through some affordable housing options, I just felt like that characteristic of the soils in a lot of Williston is kind of an important element, just to kind of make sure that people understand that. I don't know if we have a map.
Oh, sure.
I'm sure we do,
Yeah,
right?
We do, but it's like, it's buried, so I think you're right, in bringing
Okay.
that into a forefront, and
Okay, good.
when applicants are coming in and asking about subdivision or an accessory dwelling
Yeah.
unit, I'm like, the number one thing I want you to do is go figure out your septic stuff
Yeah,
first.
right,
'Cause that can
exactly.
really be a, you know, a death toll for a project,
We've had-
especially the affordability
Yeah,
component.
yeah,
We've had
absolutely.
calamities in the ag rural district, including Meadow Ridge
Yeah,
and Porterwood.
Yeah.
Where people built houses, septics failed. Then we made a plan to put the Meadow Ridge on the Johnson farm and that failed, and then they had to connect to the sewer.
Right,
yeah.
so I think. A little bit of what I'm hearing is it's kind of a counterpoint to that part you started with of, hey, we have all this land, or
Mhm,
there's this rural part of town that is pretty exclusive, right?
mhm.
And there's this smaller part of town, the residential zoning district, village and growth center. Where whether we have good soils or bad soils, it doesn't matter, we've made
Right.
other decisions that this is the place to provide the wastewater treatment. And doing so in a concentrated area means shorter pipes, fewer failure points.
More efficiency.
More
Yeah.
efficiency. Also supports a land use pattern that's more efficient for other reasons like
Mhm.
transportation, energy, et cetera. But I think there's something, you know, like, I know that the reason there's density at the bottom of the hill in North Williston Road at Williston Woods is because Williston Woods is sitting on a great big pile of
Yes.
sand.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's one of the only places in
Mhm.
town where the
Mhm.
soil conditions are such that you can have a big, relatively simple community wastewater system, and get away with that. And Porterwood, you know, as another dense rural development is the opposite. It was built in this really inherently non-resilient way.
Mhm.
Where both its water supply and its ability to dispose of wastewater were, you know, you were working against things from day one, and, you know, those things have ultimately failed. Meadow Ridge with offsite treatment on the Johnson farm, both where Meadow Ridge is. You know, they're on their own well water, it's very high in manganese, which is very hard on septic systems.
Mhm.
And then you design it with this massive off-site subsurface system, which, you know, it's good for 30 years. Septic systems start failing the day you start using them, and, you know, they don't generally rejuvenate themselves.
Johnson farm only lasted about 10 years or something.
Maybe, I
Started
forget,
failed really quickly.
It failed very- it failed
They
very-
removed it and.
It was quick. Yeah, I remember that.
And it's the manganese, and the bottom line is those houses shouldn't allowed to have been built on those soils on. Meadow Ridge.
and what's interesting is the houses in Meadow Ridge are. On bad soils, on steep slopes. But not in the field, in the foreground, which is literally a Randall Arendt Rural by Design textbook illustration you can get that says, put them in the woods so you can't see them, which is this thing that I always kind of want to tweak its nose when I see it and be like. There's nothing more resilient or environmentally good about this, it's just you can't see them.
Mhm.
But I think making the point somewhere, this is like real classical, what's his name? Ian McCard planning.
Mhm.
What's the book you wrote? One of you AICP people ought to know this.
Oh geez,
We've got rural by design already. Anyway, a design with nature,
Mhm.
where it says do the map. You do all of these natural resource maps to inform your planning, and one of the first ones you of course do is what are the soil conditions?
Mhm.
And I think in the plan somewhere, just making the point that things like the geology of the town have shaped and continue to shape the pattern of growth, and where that's been maybe undone by technology, like having a sewer system, it's been done with quite a bit of care about, what that means,
Mhm.
in terms of other land use impacts and things like that, so. I even as simple as saying like, why is there Williston Woods where Williston Woods is?
Right.
Well, because there's something in the ground there that makes it work. You couldn't just put Williston Woods anywhere or everywhere in Williston. It would, it wouldn't work. It would, if you were really trying for affordability of single family homes, you would want to put Williston Woods as everywhere, if that was your only thing you cared about, because it's inexpensive homes and it's dense and
Mhm.
great. But you know, whether you wanted to or not, you couldn't if you were using subsurface disposal. And water supply is a very similar story.
Right.
So we have parts of town that have very little water, or water with either manganese or uranium or arsenic in it. You
All the
know,
good things.
things that aren't great. So, you know, if you weren't making up for that with utilities, which are expensive to put in, and therefore you wanna be really careful about where you put them. Yeah, there would be these other constraints that would show up, and they do still show up out in the rural part of town.
Yeah, so I was thinking maybe, I mean, it has direct relevance for the sewer service area, you know, the sort of, okay, this is what part of why we can concentrate growth here. But it may also, the whole soil characteristics piece might have some relevance in the sections of the plan where we talk about things like other constraints, like slope, wetlands, you know, all those other things that we kind of just list off the top of our heads, like without trying. And we all recognize those as very clearly constraints against development. And I feel like soil characteristics just doesn't pop up as much. And so maybe it can also be kind of folded in there. And yeah, so anyway, it was just I hadn't realized that so much of Williston soils wouldn't support in-ground septic systems. And once I did understand that, I was like, oh, things make so much more sense, you know? And some of our rules and regulations and the development pattern and all those things, not that everything depends on where you can put a septic system, but it does have one piece of influence.
I'd be interested too in the count of mounted, the percent of systems that are mounted. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, and they're expensive and they're finicky and they break down all the time.
Yeah, I have a real issue when someone says, I'm gonna do an affordable home and it's gonna have this advanced system. We used to run this at the Cape, they'd say, oh, it's a denitrifying system, like, that runs an air pump.
Yeah.
Someone has to come monitor every 6 months,
Yeah.
like, that's not an affordable home anymore, and when it fails, it's gonna be.
Exactly.
You know, you raise another point, which is in some parts of town where we've eliminated the septic constraint by providing sewer. We've also allowed development in really heavy soils where people now face drainage issues. So we have a lot of wet basements. We have a lot of neighbor conflict, you know, his water's running onto my backyard and now it's soggy. We have saturated soils downhill from stormwater ponds and things like that, so, you know. I'm really with you, like somewhere saying, you know, this stuff actually really does matter.
Yeah. And I think that's actually another piece that I wanted to mention in the in this chapter is the question of kind of climate resilience. Obviously, resilience is one of our components for each chapter, but you know, we're lucky at the moment that we tend to be somewhat insulated from flooding because we didn't build stuff in the floodplain. But you know, that doesn't mean that culverts don't wash out, like mine did. Remember that, Jacob?
Yes. Oh, several times.
Yeah, several times within the space of a week.
I was
Yeah,
actually looking for your house because you were on a little bit of gravel, a patch of gravel.
yes,
And I was trying to see if it was mapped in there.
And the village is quite red.
yeah,
It's not mapped as.
yeah. So those heavy soils are just gonna, you know, as we deal with more extreme rain events, that is, you know, potentially going to have some repercussions. I'm not sure that goes in utilities, but you know, more generally.
Well, I think when we get into hazard mitigation,
Yes.
starting to think about, you know, we think about hazard mitigation a lot with things the town typically does, like we do a lot of stone lining of ditches, we replace culverts with bigger culverts, we do a lot of things like that. we're starting to think about like events like we saw this winter where you have saturated soils and then high wind.
Mhm.
And we
And
have
all the
more,
trees go toppling down.
yeah, more and more big trees, right?
Yeah.
So our above ground utilities are more vulnerable than they used to be. Just trees fall on people's houses, they fall on people's cars, things like that happen, so I think, we can acknowledge that. I'm seeing, when I do attachment A, I'm seeing higher variability where we've got these extreme rain events. They show up in the pump stations, they show up in our sewer flows. And what Bruce told me is most of that bump and flow you're seeing isn't because the pump station's flooded, it's because there's still a bunch of sump pumps out there that are connected to our system that aren't supposed to be. But there's water in a lot of basements during those high rain events, so yeah, we are probably getting more into hazard mitigation there, but. This stuff. So in this, Emily, is red the worst?
Red's the
Red
worst,
is worse.
green is the best.
But this is well water or
This is
sewage disposal?
sewage
Okay, sorry,
disposal.
I saw well water.
Close to
there.
exactly what
going
you're-
for
Yeah.
on-site
For septic,
For septic.
okay,
What's the hashed parts? What's the hash part mean?
Just straight people.
Oh,
The
good
legends at
question.
the bottom.
Other areas served by off-site sewage disposal, so I think that's Global Foundries. And then
Okay,
this is Meadow Ridge
Yeah.
and Johnson Farm.
okay,
and then
And
not suited, sewer service area is a black boundary, I see it, I wasn't even seeing that boundary before.
yeah,
So it's like everything inside the black boundary, don't worry so much about what the map says, except another map. And this is talking about utilities that we really wanna do is to talk about within this black boundary. There are areas where it's easy to connect to Williston's sewer system, and there are areas where it's nearly impossible. Because we do a lot of pumping, so a lot of our sewer lines, here it comes, are force mains. Which are the purple ones.
Purple's fourth main, yeah.
Okay, so that's a line that's under pressure, so if you live right next door to that line, you cannot connect to it. You've gotta go from your house, either pump up to a high point where you can get into a gravity line or go downhill into a gravity line. So, purple is generally running uphill, green is generally running downhill. And the little squares you see where purple and green meet are the pump stations. And so much like the soils outside of the sewer service area, the amount of infrastructure buy-up that someone needs to make to develop a piece of property is an issue here.
And not all of those pump stations are public, so an example is the Sally's Way development up off Mountain View Road.
Yeah.
They can connect to our sewer lines, but they needed to negotiate an agreement with Meadow Run because Meadow Run owned the pump station. And even with the addition, I think the threshold in the ordinance is 200 units. Is when the town would consider taking over a pump station. So it's still gonna be a private pump station.
Yeah, so this is, that boundary looks really sort of neat and tidy, but the conversations we end up having with people who are thinking about. Doing something that requires connecting to town sewer, get much more complicated. Pretty quickly, you'll also notice, the almost complete lack of lines in the lettered avenues north of Industrial Avenue and the industrial area, both north and south of, Williston Road.
they're in green, they're in the best soils.
Right.
Some of those are in really good soils.
And then where the bagel place wanted to go is in the red soils.
Yeah,
Oh,
so it looks just like everything else from the street,
right.
but. The Robert property where U-Haul is built out, although it's in the green, they're connected to services, but they had to build a significant. Cause it's like a low pressure but pressurized line with pump station in order to serve all of those lots. So, whether you're looking at it for, potential for things like housing or economic development or diversity of uses in your industrial zone, the bagel thing was a great example of. it had been a carpet warehouse. And, you know, the dinky little septic behind that building for carpet warehouse is just fine. But if a food producer wants to go in with a retail cafe, it would have been bagels right there. As soon as they found out,
So,
their wastewater needs.
where
that
exactly
proposal
is
went
that?
away. The Vermont Paint Company building, and it's in,
Safe Blade Auto Glass.
yeah, it's in the red, just as Williston Road exits into South Burlington
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Used to be New Horizons.
Yeah, soccer.
Equipment. There.
That's right.
Mhm.
So, yeah, that stuff really matters. We're also aware of parts of the industrial district that don't have good power. So we have
Well,
businesses
yeah,
that
I
are
was
running
reading up
supplemental
on,
generators.
some of the fascinating stuff today, long-range transmission plan modeling solutions. And, yeah, I hadn't realized how complicated the power sort of distribution is, and also where our power comes from, like all over the place. Nuclear, things I thought were closed. They talk about Seabrook. Wasn't that closed?
Really?
Yeah, it's really weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it was quite eye-opening reading
No,
all
I think
these things.
Seabrook is the primary contributor of nuclear to.
Okay, so Seabrook's still open.
I
Okay.
think so.
It was only a small proportion that they had from Seabrook, but yeah, a whole bunch of like diesel generators, that kind of stuff. Like, oh, okay, bring on the solar and wind, right?
Well, it's the stuff that is needed for peaks.
Yes, exactly. So
That's the
that's what
stuff.
they're talking about
Right.
is the peak
Yeah,
demand.
Seabrook's operating license runs through 2050 right now,
Wow.
so
Yeah. Well,
gonna be there.
So when we think about like the town plan and writing a chapter, what's like all of this is stuff I did not know and would not have considered, and most people don't consider like, well, this looks the same as that, but how come you can build this here but not here?
right.
And like, so what's important to communicate to people? Like, what level of things do we want to communicate and how do we keep it digestible? Like, what's the level of depth that we think we want to go in the town plan?
This map is wonderful.
It is really good,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And I think, I think to some degree, your question is about kind of explaining why we have the development patterns we do, why there are certain constraints already in our zoning bylaws, and and here's a map that shows you, one of those constraints, and there are others, there's slope and, all these other things, so historic districts, whatever. And so I think the more we can use both visual and text, I think that's really helpful, but also framing it as you did in your question in a way that helps people recognize.
Yeah, I think you want, at this level, you want people to, number one, understand that it's there's a complex system living underneath this, and it really affects what you see out in the world, and give folks kind of a taste for that and a connection to where they can find the rest of it. So, when we get really into this, what ends up in the appendix and what ends up in the body of the text is gonna be a big conversation. The other part is, you wanna tell them what you need to tell them to support whatever the objective strategies and actions are that are coming out of the, the back end of the chapter here. So, I don't actually know what this says right now or what it
Yeah,
might
well,
say.
so for the utilities example, like Green Mountain Power, and then we also have Vermont Electric Co-op and the Velco transmission line. They are their own entities, and we're just gonna say, provide data to each other. Comment on their plans when their plans are up for renewal. Our goals and strategies are gonna be quite brief, but wanna provide a little bit of context and link people to, hey, they're doing a lot of forward thinking about the resiliency of the system and building in capacity into our system and thinking about renewable energy. So it's gonna be a lot of directing people to other resources to learn more, where right now our town plan, I think kind of shows these as more of a dead end.
Mhm.
And I think some of this is a good story opportunity too, because, this map is great and it shows that everything in red is not suited for this particular thing we're talking about. But why is that? I mean, stratigraphy and geology and soil science are not options. I mean, that's not something we installed incorrectly. It's the way it is. And I think, a small explanation of what are we talking, what is this, what do you mean by septic system? I suspect there's a lot of people that have no clue. And if we were to, as opposed to a municipal system that is a sealed, closed, and I think if we were to include a little bit of that in that story, it might help people realize, oh, now I see why it's red. I get it. I didn't know that before. And I'm one of them, by the way. I mean, I have a high level understanding, but not enough to really look at this and go, oh, I get it.
I don't think you understand septic systems until you have one. Right. And lots of people don't, so, and they didn't grow up with one, so it was,
And even then, I feel like a lot of people don't even understand it until
Right,
something
right.
goes wrong and they have to replace it or repair it, yeah.
Yeah.
And the equity issues, it's like if it's easy to replace a
Yeah.
septic system in green areas versus red, what's the equity cost there?
Definitely.
Most of what's east of 2A in the southern part there is higher than 600 feet above sea level. So it's just straight geology. North of the interstate and the very west part there that's red, all the reds there are clay soils from Lake Vermont and the Champlain Sea.
Thank you.
And all the
Wow.
green, and all the green is a sand delta when the river was emptying into the sea.
Absolutely.
And so,
And that's a terrific story to take people into this.
yeah, and that's why it's red and green there. There's not much in between.
Yeah.
Right,
It's
right.
Filled up with sand. It's either made a delta of sand or it's lake bottom.
And then I presume this is orange and red along the Winooski because it's in the flood zone
Where along the Risky?
on the northeast
Like near
side,
Jericho.
near Jericho.
Yeah.
Cause I
all
assume
the-
all of that is
The
probably,
green and yellow is sand, and yeah, probably is floodplain, yeah.
I wonder if like, if there is a section in the town plan, it's not like, I remember Jill, you said a long time ago, when you were thinking about moving here, you like picked up the town plan and you like wanted to read a specific chapter, you're like, what do they have to say about this? But I imagine that experience is like pretty minimal for people, no one's like, what do they have to say about utilities? But like, the way you phrased it, Matt, you're like, why is Williston Woods the place that it is? Like, if we had like a section that's like, maybe like just questions, like, in case you're curious, like, what if you're curious? Here's like 10 questions, whatever, and then it could link to specific points, and it's like, this is why, and then like link to certain points, and they're like, oh, like, everything is interconnected, but what if, I don't know, I'm just like
It's a
thinking
great
about like,
idea.
what if there's like a way, cause like, why am I gonna read a town plan? Like, I will read it because I'm interested, and we all will because we're here, but like I don't think anyone's like comprehends that, like, the answers that they might, like, stuff they might care about is in it, and so if we could be like, what are the questions people, and then what are questions people have about why the town is the way it is, and then have it point to other sections, that's like, oh, you wanna learn more?
Yeah.
Utilities, I don't know.
Well,
Just
I
a thought.
often would refer to this as, this is kind of like the user's manual for the
Mhm.
town, like, how does your town work?
Mhm.
And it's also the primary statement of policy ultimately made by the select board about this is where we're going. And I think there is some usefulness in being able to say, from 2025 through the end of 2032, if you're coming into Williston or you're in Williston, you want to understand where the town's going, it's here in this document. Why are there taller buildings and tap corners? Why is the town spending money to preserve that piece of land wherever it is, et cetera, et cetera. And, obviously, like, the hope is that for folks who are here and who participated in the roundtables and all those other engagement efforts we did, that there's a little bit of something in there that they, that they put in or had a little bit of a say over, or at least are aware of. And ultimately, there may be some policy moves in here, or some actions that are a little bit controversial, or that not everybody agrees on. But if you pick up the whole user's manual and read it, you would understand at least why those are the choices that the town is making. So I think anything you can do to say, yeah, you know, you wanna know more about this, go to page 15, read this half page, like, that will get you there. Something like a how to use this document.
Or like the companion guide, like.
Yeah. Graphic novel style.
Well,
It's like choose your own, if you want to know more about this, go to page, but it's like
Right.
choose your own adventure style.
Yes,
like-
exactly.
there's
I
a
don't know.
woman in Burlington who did a really great mini comic book about, I think it was about public participation in city council and like how to get
Oh,
involved.
that's great.
I'll look it up.
Yeah,
I-
the government comic book or something.
Well, there's that one, and then the one I'm thinking of was specific to Burlington, and I'll see if I can find it and send it around. But yeah, there's that,
This
that
Yeah,
thing's
I've
great
seen that one.
too.
That's a really
one.
good.
This, your different one.
Yeah, I'll find it, I'm sorry. It just reminded me of it, but I like that idea of,
Yeah, cause I feel like all our chapters are starting to have these fun little stories, these little tidbits, and it's like, it's probably gonna get cut from the town plan if we want it to be really succinct and brief history and going right to goals and actions and things. So if all these fun stories become the companion guide of, I wanna know more, and you can kind of get more into like, I said I don't like tall buildings and half corners, and I wanna understand why there's still statements in here, you can kind of tell that more embellished story.
Mhm. And tie together the chapters.
I read the last draft of this chapter, but I have to confess, I didn't read it today. Is there something in it about municipal or community ground source heating and cooling?
No,
Because that's a utility that doesn't exist today that probably should in the future.
cool. That should be a section.
I wonder if we want a bunch of community related pieces together, like, because I was thinking today also. You know, the sort of community solar piece, there could be other, you know, some of our, I was thinking about our village master plan and the sort of cottage court configuration, and thinking about how, not just for the village, but just thinking how in terms of kind of closer knit development that might have some self-supporting dimensions to it, like energy sources, those kinds of things. A shared lawnmower, something like that, you know, just thinking back to the equity and resilience piece, I think that might be another dimension of meeting those goals, is to, you know, maybe focus on these little.
So, and there's the concept of net zero developments.
Mm,
And some of that work is being done at Cambrian Rise and
Mhm.
in South Burlington at a couple of projects.
Mhm.
We could see the Glazer project potentially
I know,
taking that on as a goal
be great.
to say, we're gonna generate the heat and electricity we need on site, because we've got
Mhm.
plenty of land and roofs for solar. And well, you know, you can do ground source heat pumping
Mhm.
under pasture, under hayfield.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
A lot of it's done straight down and back up, and some of it's done horizontally.
Mhm.
And Melinda might know if the energy committee is looking at, have they been reviewing this, working with you, or?
No, We haven't talked about utilities in that context with energy committee yet.
So Melinda, you've popped in, Emily's talking about utilities right now. We haven't started on hazard mitigation, just so you know.
Right, I guess the question is, has the energy committee thought about, ground source heat or district heat options?
District heat, that's the word.
Oh,
I was
yeah,
looking for.
I was trying to think of that too.
Ground
Thank
source.
you.
District heat.
Yeah, I think in the energy plan, there is like an objective to explore the feasibility of ground source heat system in the village and in Taft Corners. So it is mentioned, but no work has been done on moving that forward yet.
You reminded me too, Melissa, that I read a write-up that you did about it, just about that the economics are really tough right now, right?
Did I?
Somehow I thought I
What?
read, somehow I thought I read something that you wrote about the economics being really tough right now for that. Maybe I'm not.
I don't remember writing anything.
Was that the clean heat stuff, which is different?
I did read that stuff too. But yeah, anyway, it's good stuff. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, I think that's it for utilities this evening.
Yeah, who knew that tiny little chapter was gonna take so long?
I know,
Sorry,
right?
it's all my fault.
All good. I think up next would be Andrew conservation areas.
Right, let me see if I can share my screen. All right, I will be relatively brief. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Relatively. So I went back to the conservation chapter, took another pass at it, partly because of the feedback from the last meeting, or from the meeting we reviewed this, and partly because of some recent conversations I've had with the Conservation Commission, who I'm also trying to loop in on the town plan process, helping out with some of this. So most of my work so far has been working on comments from the Conservation Commission. I found some really great work from Simon that he kind of mentioned in a note to me, but I did not realize how extensive it was. That was conservation comments on the last town plan. That was a very curated experience for them, and really had a lot of in-depth feedback. And so I've started to incorporate that. And also kind of just fleshed out some of the existing things that we had in this chapter. And then also heard your last notes, or the planning commission notes from that meeting, specifically on things like definitions of conservation, various goals, how land is conserved, who land is conserved for, and public access, and why we conserve. And so I might just leave it open if anyone has reviewed it and has questions, comments. Chapin mentioned that he might have a couple, but want to leave it there.
As far as I gotten is just that right there under number 2, we really do want to list the ways that things can be conserved from, and the levels of conservation, and I just think we want to expand this, define the types. And
I agree. I think it's important too for setting those goals, the goals of like 30 by 30, 50 by 50, distinction of what kind of conservation we're talking about, because if it's conservation easements, that could be really challenging. I think our 16% is a combination of all of those. And so
yes.
we're getting close to 100% increase, but yeah, I agree.
And the other thing is we talked about rolling the working landscapes into this. And that hasn't happened yet, right?
Sorry, can you repeat that? The work,
I believe we talked about rolling the working landscapes work into this conservation chapter. Is that right?
you, Shayla, and I did talk about that. Yeah, I think in our initial conversations, a lot of the goals we were talking about seemed to overlap. And from Matt's instructions, I think we're trying to keep it separate for now, but maybe that might make sense in the future.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah, I don't wanna do too much of this tonight. I'm hoping next meeting to talk about kind of our game plan. For taking all these draft chapters and starting to think about merging and trading elements and organizing and, all of that, cause there's gonna be a lot of that to do. And also refining, cause, you know, we're still writing things too. But there's definitely gonna be an opportunity to start looking at elements and thinking about where they're best fully expressed and where they're better referred to and kind of cross-pollinated between chapters.
Thank you for working on it, Andrew. I didn't this week.
Mhm.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's not easy.
And
but
also, thanks
chipping
for
away.
working with conservation too, the Conservation Commission.
I'm excited to include them, and I think they are excited to participate. Their comments from Simon were really detailed, and so I'm looking forward to picking all their brains. They're real experts as well.
We hazard a guess what we move to next.
You ban the chicken puns and then the hazard mitigation puns come in
Just never
and
end.
cannot win.
I'm trying to mitigate the plums now.
Oh.
Yeah. So this
Can you
chapter
expand a little
is,
bit, Melinda?
what's that?
Could you make that a little bit wider so that the print is a little bit bigger for us?
Sure.
I think just do the percent. Oh, there you go. Yeah,
How's that?
much better. Thank you.
Okay. So this chapter is long. It's probably a lot longer than it needs to be, and this is probably one area where it's like less is more kind of thing. So I don't know. I kind of looked over the regional and the town hazard mitigation plans and kind of consolidated a lot of it in here, and that's probably, I mean, it was helpful for me to kind of have it all in front of me in a condensed version, but I realize that it's probably not in the end kind of what we want for this chapter. I think what I'm looking for is feedback on like, what does this chapter really need to include, and like what should it include that you think is missing in the town's hazard mitigation plan, or are there things that should be like that are already in the plan that should be emphasized in this chapter. I really like this intro was written by Steve, and I really like that. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost, etc. I think it kind of really speaks to what the whole point of hazard mitigation is, and so, you know, kind of, yeah, like what's the whole point, and what do we need to be focused on for in the town plan, and to help the town achieve its goals for hazard mitigation. So there, I've included information about how climate change is going to affect a lot of these hazards and make them worse and more frequent and more dangerous, more intense. I think that was probably missing from the last town plan, just sort of an examination of, climate change impacts. And then this is all just really a recitation of hazards that I don't think really needs to be in this chapter. So I'd like to kind of probably cut a lot of it out. There's a section on COVID, pretty long section. It probably doesn't need to be that long. But I think it's important to talk about COVID because it was such a unique thing that happened in our life, in the recent past, and had unique and it had unique impacts on the town. And so I think it's important to mention it and to kind of look at what were the lessons from that, what can we learn and what can we do differently, how can we prepare for something like that in the future. I know that wasn't spoken about in the last, certainly not in the last town plan, nor in the last hazard mitigation plan. And then the other thing that I think is important to acknowledge is extreme heat and how that has become a increasingly impactful, serious hazard with climate change, increasing the frequency and duration of heat spells, and just how they impact us, and how can we prepare? What things do we need to prepare for, or how can we best prepare for extreme heat and be more resilient to that? And then this section kind of goes into some detail about the Emerald Ash Borer, because that's also a recently arriving hazard that the town's been trying to address through ash tree replacements, and kind of how can we best address that, and are we doing what we need to do? Are there things we can do better, differently? And then just talking about the mitigation actions that the town has done, and then what's been noted in the hazard mitigation plan as things that the town can improve upon, and greater coordination between town departments was like kind of number one on that list. And we know that there needs to be greater coordination for a lot of other reasons, not just hazard mitigation planning. And then also involving citizen groups and committees in hazard mitigation planning. And then public engagement. We didn't really ask questions directly related to hazard mitigation planning, but we did hear some. We heard a little bit about flood resiliency. We heard about just the town needing to prioritize building resilient infrastructure, particularly with regard to temperature. Temperature resilience was an expression that was used in some of that feedback we got. And then 41% of participants in the roundtable activities noted that energy and climate resilience should be the town's #1 priority. So kind of, just like looking at what our goals and what our vision and goals are, just how can the town be more prepared? Obvious resilience is kind of a no-brainer here. It's like being mitigating hazards makes the town more resilient. Makes the town more resilient. And then, you know, how can we make our road infrastructure more resilient? Our power and telecommunications infrastructure, all that stuff. And equitable, I mean, I think that really means, yeah, looking at the entire community, looking at more vulnerable people in the community, and how can we address their needs, especially when these events occur, and how can we prioritize the people that will be most impacted by natural disasters, for example, or by climate change. And then there's just, you know, there's a bunch of action items, goals, objectives, and strategies and actions down here. So a lot of them has to do with stormwater resilience. Probably is going to overlap a bit with the watershed health chapter, and again, we can kind of figure that out, like what should go where, kind of thing. But and then you know, so yeah, a lot of this protecting land within river corridors and floodplain, a lot of that is probably in the, you know, belongs in the health, the watershed health chapter. And then this was sort of like in the hazard mitigation plan, this goal of being a place where neighbors help neighbors, in a town that facilitates strong and caring community relationships. You know, so how can we do that? What opportunities do we have to do outreach, to build community through collective planning, work with volunteers, leverage volunteers to increase the town's preparedness and resiliency. And then, you know, there's a bunch in here about communication, reliable internet, broadband coverage. And then there was also an objective that was in the hazard mitigation plan about improving emergency services radio communication. And I like what you added in here, Steve, because I honestly wouldn't have a clue about how to what strategy should be in there. And that's it, I guess. So happy to hear feedback about any of this, or just, yeah, thoughts.
And Melinda, if I could just add one comment, I remember driving down Route 2 a few years ago, and there's a guy in front of me in a tiny little Kia with a king-size mattress strapped to the roof of his car with twine. And he's got his hand out the window holding it like, I got this. No, you don't. Okay. And that's kind of, that was in my mind as I was adding these little pieces here. These events are going to happen, and in the world of IT and telecommunications, they often talked about like outage prevention. No, you can't prevent outages. They're going to happen. Things fail, things go bad weather events occur, and so on. All you can do is prepare for the eventuality that they take place and have a plan in place that says, we've thought this through, and if this happens, this is what we think is the appropriate response. And so I tried to build as much of that into this as I could. As far as the telecom thing, just one quick comment on that. Most people I know who still have a wired phone in their home, which isn't very many, but those that do, have cordless phones, not a cellular, but a cordless phone. It won't work if there's a power outage. And so, you know, if that's what you rely on, you need a wired phone. This is the lack of a nail problem, right? I mean, it's great to have cellular service and so on, but do we know, for example, that the generator at the base of whatever tower we rely on for connectivity has an adequate diesel supply to keep the turbine running in the event that there is a long-term power failure? Because if cellular is the thing that we rely on, it's not just having the phone, it's about being able to charge it, being able to power it. Are there charging stations around town that would give people the ability, like in an airport, to go plug in and get their half-hour charge so they're still connected for emergency services? Those are the little things that often get overlooked, and I just want to make sure, that's why I put those in there. I want to make sure that those are thought about, because as the town develops its infrastructure, or further develops its infrastructure plan, our incredible reliance on technology can fail for the simplest reason. If we don't have power, we got nothing. And so that's just, I'll stop there. But I mean, that's why I added those little elements there at the end.
And the word microgrid, if it's not in there, might want to be there.
Absolutely.
Because in terms of resilience, when you have one house or two houses or 10 houses or a whole block on a microgrid with battery backup, it's a whole nother ballgame.
Absolutely right. The minimal single point of failure, right?
Yeah. It went by kind of fast, but I didn't see the police and public works have been wanting to have a better communication system around town.
Yes.
If you address that in there. Okay.
Yeah, Melinda put a piece in there, and one of the little things that, and it's pretty comprehensive, she did a good job on that. Well, one of the pieces that I tossed at as well is that in some of the communities I've worked with, I know people laugh at it, but for emergency services, people rely on ham radio.
Yeah.
And some communities even CB radio still to this day, because it works. It's unlicensed, it always works, they're cheap. If you get up high enough, they've got tremendous distance. So in the event that there was a major failure, I mean, think about this for a second. People don't think about the fact that we are in fact on an active earthquake area here. If we were to have a disruptive event, not catastrophic, but enough to knock down a cell tower or take it out of service, you're done. You have no communications at that point. But because these things aren't walkie-talkies, right? But if you do have walkie-talkies, if you have CB radio, if you have ham radio, at least you've got emergency communications. And so, again, this is that, least common denominator problem that I just want to make sure we don't lose. Your microgrid idea is really powerful as well. I like that.
I'm not sure that it goes here, but seeing the emerald ash borer, which is sort of a slow motion hazard with trees dying. But poison parsnip gets people all the time if they aren't aware of it, and tick-borne illnesses. And those are both secondary to climate change. And then a third indirect one is more erosion from big rain events, puts more phosphorus in the brook, which degrades the brook and then creates algae blooms in the lake, which have health effects. And I don't know if that's, to me, that's probably in a different chapter, but I don't know if it's.
It is important. And Melinda, I think you do have the tick-borne illness in there, as I recall, but the poison parsnip is not.
Right, yeah, that's a good one.
And I think the other thing to mention perhaps, and maybe it's not in this chapter, but the ash trees, just like the elms before them, they're not just aesthetic. I mean, they also provide cooling for homes and businesses and so on, and that's a loss.
This is kind of a grim topic, but I wondered if you had any thoughts of including material on like violence in the hazard chapter. As I said, not a cheerful topic, but so much of emergency preparedness. My understanding of it, at least in the sort of in my world in the university, a lot of it is about you know, sudden violent incidents, and especially mass incidents. And, yeah, so I just think maybe that's something that you would want to consider. I realize that, again, a lot of the same principles are in play. It's about communications, it's about, you know, access to, you know, ambulance services and police services and all of those things, but kind of on the social side of things, I see some of those dimensions very related to what we're talking about in a lot of the chapters about having a strong community and having a sense of place and feeling connected, right? And we know that so many of the, you know, mass shootings that happen in this country are often people who feel disconnected. So you know, I do feel like there is a link to the, you know, what the community can do to, you know, help people have meaningful public spaces that they can interact with others, you know, have supportive recreational spaces, all those things. And, you know, it might not be perfect, but I think we do a fairly good job at some of those things, and so it would be good to mention them. And you know, and that threat, particularly when I learned that the leading cause of death for young people is gunshot wounds and not cars anymore. And I know that has plays a huge emotional role in a lot of school systems and also in the minds of young people. People are, you know, young people are scared to go to school, and including in Williston. So I just want to, as I said, not a cheerful topic, but I do think it's an important one
It is a.
to address.
Ben Rose is a Wilson resident and is big part of the state's hazard team. And he was at one point our representative in the legislature too. And he'd be happy to review this chapter if that makes sense.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you for that.
One thing I noticed in this chapter that I like, and I think the group might think about expanding on, is that there's this idea of building up existing networks of people, whether they're, you know, a pickleball league or a Boy Scout troop or whomever. Those existing connections and networks can often be put into, you know, repurposed or put into action around emergency response, because it's just people, you know, it's people, you know.
Yeah.
Or people who can get together and fill in for needs when there's, you know, a disaster or something happening, something goes down. And so one thing I think the town is really good at is supporting the sort of the creation and the sustaining of those groups, even when they're not official town groups. And we might be getting over into more of that like social infrastructure idea, but I think the idea that there's a dual benefit, or there's another benefit to doing that, just like creating those community spaces. You know, there's a benefit of just they're nice, but they can also be really vital for something. And it's nice to have a softball league, but it also means you now have 20 or 40 people who all know each other and know how to get in touch with each other, or where each other lives, or,
Yeah.
you know, gee, I haven't heard from so-and-so in a couple days. Have we gone and checked on them? So I think I sort of see that, I saw that in one of the sections here, but just that kind of acknowledging that that's a thing that municipalities are actually pretty good at, is supporting the existence and the ongoing operation of groups that can kind of get back together around a different purpose if there's something that needs to get done.
That also ties into the idea of creating a sort of secondary skills inventory. This idea that says, you know, so-and-so is, you know, an engineer by day, but at one time they were a paramedic or a, you know, an EMT or whatever, and be voluntary, of course, but just knowing that we have those skills around, that we could call on would be valuable, and it would be a great way to recognize people's skills, which might get them more willing to be involved in helping us plan for the eventuality of a disaster, you know? So it's just a thought.
I like that
And-
idea.
Just a quick note, we might want to put some of this in the social infrastructure piece.
I think so, yeah.
In chapter, or our second one.
Yeah, cause this is like social infrastructure and hazard
Yeah.
mitigation coming right together.
Absolutely.
Right, like who are our ham radio experts? There's a guy that's got a bunch of them.
Yeah. I mean, you can go back, there's some great stories from Irene where somebody was just
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, somebody needs to be the central person for this town, and like, she just went to the town hall and said, okay, I'm here.
Mhm.
And everybody just was like, okay, you're the leader now, you
Yeah.
know, and those informal networks just can pop up, but with a little bit more, you know.
Yeah, like Jenna's Promise and Johnson, which is like recovery and addiction focused, and they became like the hub for flood recovery last year.
Mhm.
When they had the huge earthquake in Alaska in 1964, I think it was, where they had 8-foot displacements on roads. There was one ham radio operator who was in a tiny little village way up in the northern part of the state, right on the border with Canada, who became the one and only communications person. There was all phone service was knocked out. There was no phone into Alaska. And so this guy worked with the military, and he was up working the ham radio for something like 70 hours nonstop, just to coordinate, because it was the only way they could communicate, just to coordinate communications between the military that were trying to help out and the local people in Alaska and everything else. So it's just amazing how something as silly as, you know, that can really come to the fore in a situation.
I was just gonna have one little comment, which is that I think the social kind of social supports also have relevance. Kind of drawing a thread into the health component. So, you know, we already have. We had gone through that kind of audit of our town plan a few years ago. This was just before COVID, I think. Where the health, I wish Shayla was here because she would remember it.
Oh, when the Department. of
Yeah,
Health
when the
went
Department
through
of
the whole
Health
thing
kind of
with-
audited
Yeah.
our plan to kind of evaluate, like, are we prioritizing the right things? And I see that the health thread is a really good way to connect things like hazard mitigation and the social infrastructure piece. Is that gonna be, what is the fate of, like? That was more of an audit of what we already had, right? And
Mhm.
tweaking things throughout. It wasn't its own.
Wasn't its own
appendix.
thing, so I mean, we don't have like a public health
Right,
chapter.
I remember that audit resulted in some amendments to the town plan, I think.
Yes, there
we
were,
did.
I think they were mostly like mental health and social infrastructure.
yeah, and then there was also like the smoking prevention for youth kind of angle
some of
and
that.
that kind of thing, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, that might just be something to kind of revisit and maybe amplify in some of the chapters.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, I can definitely go back and find
Mhm.
the version of the document with the insertions that were
Mhm.
related. That was the same time that we did, river corridors.
Or I think it was the forest fragmentation.
Or, sorry, right.
I
Yeah.
had problems with the energy plan.
Before 2020, come
It
on,
was after the energy plan, I believe.
who knows what we were
I
doing?
know, we're all in
Um,
fog. We're having our health crisis.
But you know, what I do remember about that is there were these little insertions and sort of
Yeah.
statements that were added really throughout.
Yeah,
And it may be worth in one of these chapters or somewhere recognizing the very strong and important connection just between public health and planning.
Yeah.
And maybe putting a little finer point on it
Mhm.
and stating some goals, and we can talk about like where those end up.
Right.
Cause it was a little scattershot trying to do it
Mhm.
as insertions.
Retroactively,
It was
yeah.
kind of saying like, oh, this thing they just talked about is actually also a public health thing, like that's, you know,
Yeah.
having an
Yeah.
inclusive process.
Right.
To consider zoning changes is actually a healthy thing to do too, and it was
Mhm.
a little bit slapped on, but it was great to get it in. So I'm glad you remembered that.
Yeah, I think this would be a really good chance for us to bump that up.
Yeah,
And to really lean on the health dimensions of so many of the things, whether it's, you know, environmental quality of things, the social side, traffic and transportation, one of our most damaging to health, whether it's through crashes or
oh, yeah.
all those things, air quality. Yeah, so I can see like a lot of kind of dimensions of engagement with the public health dimension, and Shayla is perfect for that. So too bad she's not here, but we'll rope her
Gets
in.
the assignment.
That's right.
One more chapter?
One more chapter.
Yeah. So. This one, I don't know how much I want to show, because I'm way behind, but we're talking about, town departments and services, and. I guess the first thing I'd want to say about this section is it's often been kind of like an expanded version of the town report. Here's this department, it has this many people, it has this kind of trucks or this kind of equipment. It's facing these needs, et cetera. And I do think it's good to put an update in the town plan about all of those things, but. I think it's really important that the plan be forward-looking, and talk about the way each department sort of sees itself evolving over the next, you know, really 25 years, if we peg it to that 2050 timeframe. And I've started engaging with a couple of our department heads about that, but not enough to really write it all down. And it's different for everybody. And the other thing I think that this chapter really lets you express is that the evolution of or changes to each department over time aren't all because of the same factors. So you go talk to people out in the public, or even if I sit in a department head meeting, and we're gonna, with all these people coming to town, this is gonna happen. And it's like, well, that relationship's not the same relationship, and sometimes population's not even the driver of what's going on. And the chapter doesn't have to be all about how population's not the only thing to think about. But, you know, our work in the planning department, for example, has changed fundamentally in the last couple of years because interest rates went up and nobody's buying and selling houses right now.
Right.
So there's a whole element of work at the front desk, like zoning compliance certificates and permit checks and things like that, that's really just kind of like not happening at all. But also we're in a town where all the easy land to develop on has kind of been developed on, which means when those subdivision proposals come in, they're funky and they're complicated, and there's all those constraints showing up, and the development reviews are taking more time. we're negotiating more complicated conversations with other departments when development comes in and is proposed, because it's more dependent on other town services to come in. Or there are more complex emergency service scenarios that our fire department is seeing when they see proposed development. So our world is changing. It will change some when there's more people in town, but it's changing for a lot of other reasons that are not necessarily related to that. If you're the recreation director, some of, what changes about what you do might be because there's more or fewer people in town, but a lot of it's gonna be because there's an aging population in town. So the demand for types of recreation is gonna change. The other thing is, a lot of our departments do have some kind of either recent assessment of their level of service or a forward-looking master plan. The library's working on a master plan right now, and also working on a facilities plan that's, getting into like almost preliminary design phase at this point. Rec is looking at facilities stuff, and the community center conversation looms large in that and for the entire town. So there is a place in this plan to say this is who we are and what we do as an institution in the town, but also to try to reflect, I think, as the plan serves that user manual function. Okay, you just got plopped down in Williston. What does the town actually do? And what does it think it's going to do going forward? Are there things it used to do that it doesn't do anymore? We used to have a fence viewer. We don't do that anymore.
Oh, what?
Fence viewer. Fence viewer. Fence viewer.
Fence viewer in another town.
Yeah, tell what the fence viewer.
It's when people have boundary disputes,
Okay.
you are the lay person it's like the dog catcher or the health officer.
Mhm.
It's mostly ceremonial, but it's a holdover from the 1800s.
Yeah. And there
So
was
like-
one in Williston at one time.
So maybe this is our hazard mitigation too. We could have a town crier,
Mhm.
and then
Ooh.
we wouldn't have to worry about the power being out.
We have a clock. like
Here you
this.
just the power is out.
Yes. Very.
That's the thing, is if all the power
Potluck.
goes out, that clock on the Federated Church will still work as long as somebody goes and winds it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
But that's. We've had these kind of townwide strategic planning conversations in the past, internally as department heads or at a select board retreat. And when Rick McGuire was still manager, he ran one, and it was the first time I did a select board retreat as the planning director. And he said, write me a memo about like what you think you're facing in the future. And everybody wrote these memos like the world is getting more complicated, our mission is changing, our capacity is strained, we need more people, we need more money, we need more trucks, whatever. And I talked to Rick after the retreat, and he's like, yeah, that really wasn't what I was expecting. Wasn't what I was expecting. And I was like, well, that's, the world we all see because of what we do is changing and getting more complicated, and our needs are more diverse, and everything's getting more expensive, and all of that. And we saw in our roundtables an incredible diversity of opinions about what should the town be doing.
Mhm.
All the way from don't do anything but emergency services. If you want to go swimming, you can jump in Lake Iroquois, to we would like a full-fledged indoor recreation facility with a pool as a community center, and that should be something that the town provides. And there are services we don't provide, like we don't do trash collection.
Mhm.
Nobody does. Well, there are towns that do, but
Westford doesn't include it in your taxes.
Bristol does it with Clydesdales and a hay wagon. Still. Well, actually, that guy won the bid against a truck company. He went out and showed the town that he could do it faster.
I'm telling you, I'm seeing a lot of recurring back to the early 19th century here. We've got town criers, fence
Yep.
viewers
horse-drawn
are there,
trash removal.
horse-drawn trash collection.
Yeah, you know, so one thing I think it's important to recognize is that it means a lot of things to different people. And there are things that towns, if they're gonna be a town, they have to do, they're statutorily required to do. And there are things we do because people want us to do them. You know, I don't think there's any law that says you have to have a library or a rec department. You don't have to have zoning. If you don't, there are some things that can happen to you that you probably wouldn't wanna have happen, but you don't. You know, you don't actually have to have police and fire departments to be a town. You do have to keep town records. So, in Moncton, they were in the garage of the town clerk's house for a long time. You know, and that's true in a lot of small towns. But I think recognizing that there are some choices about that, and, you know, if you folks all sort of think back to like, from March until whenever the budget finally passed. Sort of the conversations, you know, obviously they were much more about what's a school and what should a school do, because that's the one that costs way more money on your tax bill, but there was also. You know, there was a added position for human resources in the original Williston budget that was taken out of the approved budget. And, you know, I heard some comments of, you know, Williston doesn't need that. Well, you know, we're a 100-employee organization, you start to. Somebody's gonna do HR stuff, whether you have somebody with the title or not at that point. So I think it's a place a little bit to have that conversation, and I'd like to circle back to it also once we refine some of these other chapters where we have this great big to-do list. This is primarily a to-do list for the town, right? This is what will the town of Williston do? And run that against, well, what of this will be done by the paid staff of the town of Williston? And what do those various departments that have those staff need in order to be able to provide that?
Yeah.
So,
That touches on a real cultural divide. Countrywide, statewide, and townwide. And I don't know how we address it. We have to take what the people have told us is the level of service they're looking for. I think. I know we're looking at advanced, trying to do what's right. So we own the planning part to be in a good place in 20 years or 25 years. What do we need to do? But in terms of, do we have a swimming pool, a municipal swimming facility that I feel like has to be driven by public demand? And by the way, when the addition was done on Williston Central School in the late 80s, early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, there was originally a swimming pool in there. There's a wing that has not been, the mosaic wing off to the left of the stage, that was going to be redone into a swimming facility, and it was pulled out of the bond. And people, the comments, we didn't have front porch forum there, but the kind of comments you heard, we still had full town meeting. The kind of comments you heard were what you were saying about, we don't need that. That's an elite thing. You know, that, and I think, I think the community center, that's the hot button issue for that reason.
Because it's certain, there's an identity question kind of buried in there.
It's the most, the most hot button issue of the community center.
I think this is not necessarily the chapter to do it in, but I was reading one of the past town plans that talked about growth in the town. And it was sort of, I'm gonna really paraphrase, but like, one bad thing about growth is I don't recognize everybody walking down the street anymore. And therefore, we should really limit growth. And that's kind of a thread in a statement in, I don't know, like the 1990 town plan, like this place is changing and people don't, you know, recognize each other from the family reunion anymore when they're walking down the street. I mean, literally, it's gotten to a sense that it's like, it's gotten too big for that. And where my response would be, well, let's build some community then.
Mhm.
Yeah.
The policy that's justified
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
well, I guess we shouldn't grow so fast or so much. So we have time to catch up and get to know each other. Or, you know, and it's kind of funny, but it's also like not a strange sentiment that I think you hear. And so it is becoming.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chapin.
Chapin. You know, it is becoming a bigger and more complicated place, and the town institution is becoming bigger and more complicated along with it, and that is definitely true. And we're approaching some sort of breakpoints in scale, you know, so what we call the Baker report about the police department said, you're not quite big enough, and you're really not big enough to recruit officers that are interested in any kind of promotional track. Because you're not big enough for someone who comes in to have anywhere to be promoted to, and that's one of the reasons that you have officers who are leaving, for other places.
Mhm.
And so you need to get a little bit bigger just to meet your demand for services, but then also a little bigger than that to actually be able to be the organization that you want to be. And again, that's not population growth driving that, and, you know, frankly, our needs for policing are driven by
Walmart.
box retail, being, you know, highly vulnerable to that.
Private security or something.
Well, and I have seen that conversation play out, which is what is the town's responsibility? And what is the private sector's responsibility when it comes to that? And it's a kind of a charged word, but Mr. I don't remember his rank, Baker. I say lieutenant, but it might have been something higher than that. I don't want to say it wrong.
Colonel,
Colonel Baker?
maybe, I don't know.
I used
I
to
feel
know.
like that's what he said.
Anyway, he used in his report quite frequently the word chaos. And yeah, it's an inflammatory word. But I will say that if I'm at a retail store and there's like someone running out the front of the store, you know, with an armload of stolen goods and someone running after them and screaming, and yes, that feels chaotic and I don't like that. And so there's an element of, you want to have policing because you want people to be safe, and you also, a lot of folks want to have policing so that that's not part of their daily life, is that there are these sort of chaotic things going on around them. And I think that's another one of those kind of identity questions, that's at the core of the we don't want to be Burlington critique of doing dense urban things in Williston, right? Is I don't want that. And talking about how you can meet your land use goals and your housing goals and your social services goals and your employment goals and all those other things through change, evolution, and growth, and also not end up with some of that other stuff. And I think there's a lot of folks who critique that, who just don't believe it's possible. They're like, nope, you're gonna get bigger. My world is gonna get more complicated, and it's gonna be more expensive no matter what you say. There's no getting around it. And I don't want that. I wanna just, you know, pull up the drawbridge and freeze it in time.
That's a really good way to phrase it.
Yeah, Ken was very fond of referring to the drawbridge mentality of suburban planning. So anyway, I see those things playing out a little bit in conversations we have with citizens about literally the institution of the town itself, and you know what it will do and not do, and what services it will provide and not provide. So there, I just talked my way through it and didn't show you my terrible looking draft. So we'll come back to that. I think we have a couple of. I don't know if we have whole chapters, we haven't, I guess we've got to get into, I don't know if I updated the next time thing on this agenda well enough.
My next is archaeology with us, but I'm also, we'll reach out, we'll get together.
Okay. All right.
We'll keep chugging along. I can't believe so many of you were willing to come to a meeting on July 2nd, but I guess the 4th is a weird holiday, right?
in so many ways.
Plus, it's nice to be in Williston on the fourth,
It is.
It's
third and fourth.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, it is.
I have we have people come to us on this time of year.
Oh, good.
You can't miss the lawn chair,
Yeah.
you know.
The lawn chair brigade, the ice cream social.
Yeah.
Ellie, you should tell us if we're adjourned, and if they're adjourned or not.
Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm gonna talk to you some.